We begin with the race to replace Justin Trudeau as two big names dropped off the list of contenders today. Former BC Premier Christy Clark and Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne announced they would not enter the race. Clark's decision comes 4 days after she denied ever being a member of the Conservative Party. She now says she misspoke about that. Champagne, meanwhile, says he wants to focus on his role in cabinet.
I will dedicate my energy to defend Canada, to defend Canadians, to defend Canadian businesses. It was probably one of the most difficult decisions in my life, but I think it's the right one at the right time.
So these are the remaining contenders. Several backbenchers, Liberal MPs, have said they intend to run, and sources say former central banker Mark Carney will launch his campaign Thursday in Edmonton. Former Cabinet Minister Chrystia Freeland will also announce her bid within this week, sources tell us. And while Minister Jonathan Wilkinson is still considering, sources say Minister Karina Gould will enter the race this week.
But I think it is extremely important that we have a younger voice in the race who can relate to people where they are and the struggles that they're facing today.
Okay, let's bring in Catherine Cullen, host of the CBC podcast The House, and Louis Blouin, the parliamentary bureau chief with Radio Canada. Good to see you both on a big week. So, yeah. Christy Clark, let's start there. Catherine, you got the first and only interview, it seems, of her leadership bid, such as it was. What do you make of this move by the former Premier of BC today to get out?
Yeah, she cited a couple of reasons, right? Not enough time to mount a successful campaign and for her to effectively connect with Francophone Canadians in their language. Let's acknowledge that interview that she did with the House last week on Friday. Not a great start to the campaign. It called into question her Conservative ties, and more than anything else, it had her sort of explaining, saying she misspoke about her own record in both the Liberals and the Conservatives. But I think for her to talk about particularly connecting with Francophone Canadians, my understanding is that was a pretty big issue here. And she did say when we spoke to her, the next Prime Minister of Canada has to be bilingual. That is important. She acknowledged she is not. She said no one in Canada is working harder on this issue than she was. But I do think that her French was a real challenge for her there, as well as sort of, there's not a lot of time to get momentum going in this race to bring people together. In the end, it just didn't
everybody got surprised, right, by the speed of it all. And she was going to Jonquière in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region to learn French. She went, she did a couple of trips there, but what we were told is that it was not progressing very, very good. So you need to be able to talk to Francophone Canadians. There's a lot of them outside of Quebec, and not only, it's in the Maritime also, and the Atlantic regions, it's very important. So that's a main factor, and especially if you end up in front of other leaders in a debate, in tight interviews and all, it's going to be complicated. It would have been very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I heard the French media observing that she wasn't even tweeting in French, right? The big I misspoke tweet, right? Like that connection just wasn't happening.
And she's not known in the French Canada too. Like people remember her bid, but
she did the Christmas video in French, which was very subtle, as she was building up to go. But obviously, with all the things that happened, she's not in the race. But I want to stick with the French issue for a second, if I can, Louis, because François-Philippe Champagne, as expected, I think, announced today he won't be running. Mélanie Joly not running. Yep. The two most prominent Quebecers, I think, talked about in this race, Dominic LeBlanc, a Francophone minister, not running. Now, Frank Baylis is getting into it, so there is a Quebec candidate per se. But what does it mean not to have a super prominent Francophone candidate, and certainly from the cabinet itself?
Well, it sends a weird signal for Liberals in Quebec, the membership, the electors. So what does it say if there's prominent ministers who are not running, who are not seeing this, coming up for the next election? Clearly, they are seeing that the next election is going to be very difficult. Maybe they want to jump a cycle, wait for the next one. That now is not the right time, but God, they're going to have to solidify the base in Quebec because already the bloc is very strong. So now the Liberal Party will have to try and build something there, and especially the main contestants, that could be Carney and Freeland. They have to build something in Quebec, organization, militants. They have to get support from MPs in Quebec, and a lot of them just to show that they have something that can be done in the province. But it also tells me that this race and also the next election will be played in Ontario. That's the main battlefield. That's
right. I just want to clarify. Militants, you mean supporters? Because
yes.
it means a very different thing in English. But I just want to clarify. Yeah. So, Catherine, what's your thought? You worked in Montreal for a number of years, right? I mean, what's your thoughts on what this means? You know, just for the general election too, not having that.
And what does it mean for the Liberal Party, which is the party of official bilingualism and the electoral math? I mean, it's been said for the Liberal Party of Canada, an election win goes so strongly through Quebec. And that's not impossible with an Anglophone as their candidate, certainly. But the fact that it doesn't appear that they're going to be mounting a Francophone as a serious candidate, as a candidate in this race, it does seem out of step with the history of the party, and I think it does sort of raise some questions about where it is precisely that they're going. I think the French of the candidate who wins this race will be a very significant factor.
Louis, on a general election sense, like, you know, if it is just Frank Baylis is the only candidate from Quebec, it tilts this race to, you know, one person born in the North, raised in Edmonton, one person born in Alberta, but, you know, transplanted to Toronto as the front runners right now. What does that mean in a general election for the Liberals?
Well, it says that you are not, you know, center in the decision-making of that party. You don't see yourself necessarily very reflected in the race that it will happen, but also maybe the election. So I think there's a lot of work cut out for these candidates, Ms. Freeland, Mr. Carney, maybe Ms. Gould also, to show that they understand Quebec, they understand French Canada also, and that they listen to them. They will need support to do that. But honestly, like, the Bloc is so strong in Quebec right now and has been for a while now. You know, Quebecers could also, and that's what the poll shows, just go in the Bloc Québécois parking for now and let this one pass and see. Because there's an option, there's a kind of a third option in Quebec for where there's not in the rest of Canada right now. So that's how it seems to be drawing at this point, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Stephen Harper standard of what bilingualism should look like. But again, it's worth noting that was for the Conservatives, right? Stephen Harper's French. He put a lot of work into trying to build it up. He would always start in French to show his commitment to French. I remember covering stories where, like, how many shots did we have of him and Bonhomme Carnival, like, dancing together, right? They really put the work in. But again, the electoral math for the Liberals and the Conservatives is different. So there is a bar. It is not perfection, but that is sort of what the standard is perceived to be. The challenge is added, I think, again, the timeline here, because you win. You're Prime Minister.
And look at what Poilievre is doing. He was in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean this weekend. He's very targeted. He goes in regions where he thinks he can get a seat. He was doing skidoo this weekend, you know, snowmobile with people. He was going ice fishing and all. He's very targeted. So he's building that. The LPC now, not really.
Okay, got two more things I want to touch on and just got to move through quick. Karina Gould was mentioned. Catherine, she was smiling like someone about to announce. I'm told she will announce this week. Just what are your thoughts there?
I mean, that is the sense. It's full steam ahead for Karina Gould. There's something sort of comical, right, David, about this. Like, well, if you were going to run to be leader, what would your policy be on the carbon tax?
And she's just,
watch this space. She's what makes her, I think, sort of her space in the race. It's clear that she's reaching out as a younger candidate, under 40, mother of two children, trying to, I think, sort of solidify a space for herself. Let's be honest, she does not have much of a national profile, despite having been House Leader and whatnot. So it sounds like she's getting in. Sounds like she's got a lot of enthusiasm for this. I think the question is, what sort of role does she occupy in this race?
Right, and Louis, the pitch that we're kind of sensing is generational change and in it beyond the next election to help with whatever happens after the next election, which is a differentiator from all the others who are putting their names out.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's important because, you know, it's that generation, you know, that is trying to buy a home right now, that is having kids that are struggling with affordability. So that is going to be a very important issue in the next election for sure. And Poilievre has been trying to seduce this electorate for a while, and he's succeeding. So they really need to have a strong message and people that, you know, are the incarnation of that there could be young people in government listening to their concern. That is very important. And other candidates in the race will have to find a way to do that too.
Yeah, and she's 37. I'm not ready to be 15 years older than a Prime Minister, just emotionally, but, you know, that's potentially where this could go. Look, one person who, not officially announced, but Mark Carney was on The Daily Show last night talking to Jon Stewart, right? And he's got an international profile running a couple of central banks. Just want to play a clip of Mark Carney talking to Jon Stewart and get your reaction on the other side. Have a listen to this.
A wild hypothetical. Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
You sneaky. You're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
I am an outsider. Now, I don't know if that's just a line on a comedy show or, Catherine, if that's
that
the
one made
pitch.
Pierre Poilievre laugh.
Well, yeah. But I mean, that is, as soft launches go, that's an interesting one. I mean, what are your thoughts on what we saw from Mark Carney tonight and what you expect? It's going to be Thursday in Edmonton, we're told.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things about it. There was a bit of a gamble there because the real question about Mark Carney and even the people around him, I think, would acknowledge this, is does he have the political stuff? I mean, yes, he's got this CV. He's been tested in economic crises before as a central banker, both Governor Bank of Canada, Governor of the Bank of England. But can he really relate to people? Can he do the political thing? There were certainly signs of life there, a lot of laughter. He and Jon Stewart seemed to be enjoying each other's company. Obviously, it does not go against the argument that is being made by his critics that he's perhaps too much of an elitist, being on this U.S. talk show. Also sort of interesting to do this in the United States, but not Canada. But that's what the campaign launch is for, right? So I think the big open question about Mark Carney is, can he really do the thing? Louis was talking before about, the young families who are struggling. They don't feel that they're ever going to be able to buy a home. Mark Carney can say, listen, I've got the record. But can he convince those Canadians and those Liberal Party members that he understands their problems and he can take action to resolve them?
Louis, last word to you. What are your thoughts on what we saw from Carney and where he is? Yeah?
I think that's the launch you want, with laughs, with big smiles. He had to prove that he's not only a banker. I think he accomplished that yesterday. It's a beginning. Will have to go and shake hands. He will have to go on the ground and prove that he's, he hangs out with normal people. That's for sure. But I think as far as soft launch go, I think that was all good. And he was able already to position himself. Doing that in the United States, yes, it could be controversial. He doesn't talk to Canadians first, he talks to Americans. But also he's showing that he can be a good ambassador for Canada and show to the economic establishment in Canada, see, I can be your guy. I can be there. I can do this. So I think there's a lot of different things that he accomplished yesterday. He was able to talk also about carbon tax and saying that, for regular people, not so much, but for big Canadian companies, then that's the model we should go. So I think he was able to score a lot of different points yesterday. And I'm sure that Ms. Freeland or Mr. Poilievre, looking at that yesterday, were like, we have to react. And we got some reactions from the Conservative camp today saying, it's all the same, Trudeau and all.
Right.
And,
Christian Freeland is expected to launch sometime between now and the inauguration. Yep. But is Mark Carney the front runner right now?
I love this debate. I love this debate. I mean, I think there are certainly people who would argue, yes, because he's got the CV, look at the big launch. Christy Freeland has a bigger public profile. I really think you can argue it either way. And do you want to be the front runner going into a race? I mean, typically no, because everybody's attacking you.
But in a short one, you want the head start.
He has the outsider card. That's a good one to play. He can just, get the Trudeau name out of the way. That's good for him. But what Ms. Freeland has is, what she did with Mr. Trump, renegotiating NAFTA in 2018. She did actual things. But also he could argue, 2008
Brexit,
crisis,
financial crisis. Yeah, he's been in it too.
Managed some crisis, so it's going to be very interesting.
And he's the only one in this race who was appointed to a job by Stephen Harper. Okay, we got to leave it there. Louis Blouin and Catherine Cullen, always appreciate it. Okay, let's bring in the power panel to talk about all of this. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio is Jonathan Kalis. He is a former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. None of them are running either, folks, so we can get a graphic done with your four names saying you're bowing out. Jonathan, where does this leave things now with this race? I mean, is this simply going to be... Karina Gould has this dark horse potential, but it's looking like Carney and Freeland in a head-to-head. What are your thoughts?
Unless something shocking happens between now and next Thursday, that's the deadline for candidates to, get the members signed up, to get the money in. So it would be very hard to do all of that under the radar in the last minute. So I think we're pretty clear. I guess Jonathan Wilkinson is still in the undecided column. But other than that, I don't really see anybody else. So you have a few tiers there. You would have the two front runners, Freeland and Carney. You have an experienced minister in Karina Gould. And then you would have the sort of next tier of MPs, former MPs, that don't really, I don't expect to be real players in this.
Yeah, Jonathan Wilkinson, Kate, is still thinking about it. But when I spoke to him late last week, it might have been Friday. Yes, it was right after the Christy Clark interview with the House. He kind of said, I don't have a lot of time to do the things you need to do. So he suggested there were strong headwinds against it. Where do you think this race is going right now?
Yeah, I think we have to keep in mind just the difficult challenge that Justin Trudeau has left any contender wanting to be in this race. It is an impossibly short runway to raise that money, to create distance from the Prime Minister, and I would suggest that there's not a credible candidate in the race so far that could claim that contrast and that differentiation. But trying to do so based on the parameters that have been set for this leadership race, which again is truncated based on Trudeau's decision, is a big challenge, and it's a challenge even for those cabinet ministers who are experienced politicians. So he has left the Liberal Party in this very desperate, challenged position, and that cannot be forgotten. So what we will have is not a battle for the heart and soul of the Liberal Party, which I think many Liberals would like to see, because there are a number of them who have expressed concern over the direction of the party for some time. What we're going to have instead is a contest, if you can even call it that, amongst establishment backers of Trudeau, people that have been part of his fan club since day one, in Carney and Freeland and perhaps Karina Gould.
Okay, Françoise, how do you see it?
Well, it is his club because it's been his since 2015, so it'd be a bit hard to see anything else. And time is of the essence because we know this Parliament was frozen for a good 2 months prior to Christmas. They come back. It's prorogued, but they would have come back only at the end of January anyway. So it just pushed it a couple of months to give time to the Liberals to get that so-called leadership race. So it was either Justin Trudeau. I mean, the Conservative was so happy. It should be happy right now and jumping for joy to see Trudeau gone. So, and we won't have a drama expanding for months and months and then so on and so forth. So we'll know right away who they want. I see 3 contenders: Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland. So you have the banker with a personality that I discovered last night on Jon Stewart's show. Yep. And you've got Chrystia Freeland, the rebel for some, the traitor for others. And you have the king or the queen maker in Karina Gould to give that impression to the rest of Canada that it really is a race and that a choice rating your candidate is worth something. If there's only 2, it's kind of moot. But with a third one, you can give a lot of importance to Karina Gould unless one candidate win on the first ballot.
Emily, what are your thoughts on this? Champagne bowed out today, Christy Clark bowed out. A lot of big-name cabinet ministers not running. Karina Gould will be the only member of the current cabinet to run in this race, should she go ahead as all indications are.
I think I'm reassured by this in the sense that people had their priority in order in terms of making sure that a country comes first when it comes to a time of national crisis. Karina Gould is leader of government, and the House of Commons is not sitting, and so her stepping down is not this big hole in responsibility. So it's a huge asset for her. It makes it awkward for Jonathan Wilkinson, who's still reflecting, to be everybody else as the cabinet ministers said their responsibilities are more important. It makes it awkward for him to come out at the end of the day and say anything else but agreeing with other people. Otherwise, there's going to be questions put to him. But it is reassuring in the sense that we spent the better part of last fall having a parliament that was not functioning for many reasons, but one of which was that there were a lot of holes in cabinet and we didn't have a running government. So at least it looks like the Liberal leadership is not going to affect our ability to also be responding to the crisis in the US with actually having people still in position. Right. And so there are a lot that could be said more about this, but I will just take the thing to make that point because I think it's crucial, and I think it was a worry for a lot of Canadians as well.
Yeah, we don't yet know if Karina Gould runs, whether she'd have to step out of cabinet or not for the duration of the run. But when you're dealing with an international trade crisis, Jonathan, and the House isn't sitting, House Leader is a position that you can go without for a little bit, taking nothing away from that role or her performance in it. But what's also interesting is there's no Francophone candidates in this race. You know, Joly and Champagne were the two main ones from Quebec. Leblanc is a Francophone from New Brunswick. Frank Baylis is a Quebec candidate, a former MP from Montreal, but not certainly high profile. What do you make of that? The party of official bilingualism with a power base in Quebec historically.
Historically and currently, and certainly by the polls, probably the place where they're still the strongest. So it's definitely a concern. Anybody who brushes it off is missing that. And yes, two key players in Quebec, in Joly and Champagne, passed for country over party or for figuring out whether the future is better time to run. We can try to interpret that, but that's their decision. So yes, it leaves the field wide open. You have one of the people who pulled out today, Christy Clark, who did so definitely in large part because her French just wasn't up to speed. And you have one other candidate who is still apparently in the race, who's been bashing French and doesn't think you need to speak French in Quebec, or I don't know exactly how he put it, but it was so shocking that I had to listen to it 3 times on your show. So I think that it leaves an opportunity for those who remain in the race, who have functional French, the three that we've mentioned mostly, to first of all distance themselves very loudly and clearly from Chandra Arya and that kind of perspective, because otherwise they won't have any credibility in Quebec. They're going to have to surround themselves by a really strong Quebec team, who in the caucus will support each of those, who will be their main organizers. Do they have like a real Quebec team that can explain to them how to address Quebec issues differently than the rest of the country? And so one of the things I would look for over the next few days is, what do Mélanie Joly and François-Philippe Champagne do? Do they support any of these candidates? Do they expect to play a role? Do they not? And what does that say? A lot of questions, but I think hopefully we'll get some answers to that quickly. They're going to have to address that, each one of them, very quickly.
Any idea where the Quebec organizers, Quebec MPs are going at this point? I was under the impression that without Joly and Champagne, a lot of them wanted to go to Leblanc. And none of those are options. So, Jonathan, any idea where they're kind of going right now?
I saw Alexandra Mendez is supporting Chrystia Freeland.
Yep.
I don't think that there is going to be a mad rush to one or the other, but I do know that the local Quebec organizers of those three are on the phones calling people and, the candidates themselves, having conversations to see what kind of support they can get.
Okay, we have Pascal St-Onge coming up a little bit later in the show. We'll ask her about that. But Kate, I look at this and, the Chandra Arya, what he said, I mean, everyone's denouncing that in the Liberal Party, that, French isn't important to Quebecers. I mean, I'm a unilingual Newfoundlander. I know how important French is to Quebecers, right? But there's two constituencies. There's the Liberals right now, and then there's Canadians in the general. Not having a prominent Quebecer or Francophone candidate, I mean, is that a door that opens for the Bloc even more? It feels like this gives them an argument to make.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it also opens up a door for Conservatives as well. There has been a little bit more volatility in some of the public opinion data just around Quebec vote intention. And so I think that, yes, the Liberals not producing a strong candidate from there, or whoever is selected not having a very clear and tangible connection, may run into some challenges. That for sure is a consideration that the Liberals will have to deal with. Just to your point, David, though, on the runway between selecting a leader and becoming prime minister, this is something that will have to kind of come to the fore in the leadership race itself, just because typically there would be a distance between the leadership campaign, what you say and do to get elected as the leader of a party, because the constituency is ultimately different than that of the general public. That is not really an option here. So I think it's fair to assume that what Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland and perhaps others say during this period is exactly how they would conduct themselves and what they would put forward in a general election campaign. Yeah,
they might have a 2-week calibration period or recalibration period in between, but you're signing up essentially for a 12, 14-week process, on this. But, Françoise, your thoughts on that? How does the lack of a prominent Quebec or Francophone candidate potentially affect things beyond the 9th of March?
If we're in any other time, I'd say it could affect the Liberal brand a lot. But I think the Donald Trump effect might be a bit the savior here, in a sense that Quebecers are not different than Ontarians and Albertans in a lot of aspects. We want to see what's coming next week in the American side going to affect us. And we are looking for strong leadership, probably more And I'm not saying it's not important. I'm the first one to say, for me, it's very important.
Yep.
All the explanation that Jonathan was giving, I do hope they are listening closely to what he said. They need to cater. They need to find a strong team in Quebec. I remember the years of Stephen Harper when he always started in French, tried to cater, didn't give them many more seats in Quebec, but it showed the importance of that factor.
Right.
But that being said, I do think the type of leadership, what are you proposing? How will you unite this country as a whole? Because we cannot go in little bits and parts. So that might put the other aspect a bit on the back burner, and it gives us very little time to have that showing from every candidate.
Okay, Emily, your quick thoughts on that, and then I want to switch topics here.
Yeah, first thing, the wild card here might actually end up being Pablo Rodriguez because he is the lead candidate in the Quebec Leadership Party leadership race that also just launched in parallel. And for him to become the next leader of the Quebec Liberal Party, he will have to distance himself also from the Trudeau government, show that he's a little bit more of a Quebec nationalist than your average Trudeau Liberal. And that might become awkward or create some back and forth with the federal leadership race because Pablo Rodriguez was Justin Trudeau's Quebec lieutenant.
Right.
And so I'm expecting there might be some surprise joker apparition there. And the second thing I will say is that if there is no strong Quebec candidate with this leadership race, it might help the Bloc and the Conservative in the rest of Quebec. But as far as Montreal is concerned, if it doesn't help the NDP, it's because the NDP is being unstrategic. Because normally speaking, especially in a lot of ridings that are currently Liberal, there's a lot of Montreal who would be considering NDP as a second choice. If, for example, they give Alexandre Boulris, who is their Quebec lieutenant, more of a airspace over Jagmeet Singh, but that is really up to themselves to not be their worst enemy and actually put two and two together and really campaign in Montreal.
Heritage Minister Pascal St-Onge joins me now. Minister, you went off on maternity leave and everything was fine. You come back and you're in the middle of a leadership race. What are your thoughts on where things are now that you're back?
Well, I now understand people that say that things change quickly in politics and that 6 months or even a few weeks can be very different from one day to the next. So, yeah, it's a different setting than what I was expecting for my coming back to work. But at the same time, it's an interesting moment where we get to refocus on what the priorities are. And for me, what I'm expecting from any people that wants to lead our party, but also the country, is, of course, the question of the French language, but also protecting an institution like CBC Radio-Canada that Pierre Poilievre wants to close down. So in this era where we're seeing the Trump administration and Elon Musk being part of that administration and owning TikTok, not TikTok, but X and perhaps TikTok, we need CBC Radio-Canada more than ever.
Okay, obviously that's a very personal one for me, and I declare my conflict of interest right up front on that. But I'll get to that in a second because I have some questions about the CBC mandate and where that is. But Minister Champagne is out, Mélanie Joly is out, Dominic LeBlanc is out. Frank Baylis, who's a Montreal former MP, not a current MP, says he's willing to run. I presume you're not here to announce your leadership. But the absence of a Quebec cabinet minister, the absence of a francophone candidate, what does that do to this race and potentially the general election that will almost certainly come right after?
Well, the next leader absolutely needs to be fluent in French and in English, of course. And also that person needs to make sure that they are surrounded by the strong MPs and the strong Quebec ministers that can make sure that they understand the reality and the expectations of people in Quebec. So I'm happy to be playing that role. I was elected to represent people from Brome-Missisquoi and from Quebec. And I think it's absolutely possible for a good leader to speak both French and English and do this for all Canadians, but also for Quebecers.
Okay, so with the slate that we seemingly have now, I would argue or believe that Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney would be the front runners. Your cabinet colleague, Karina Gould, may get into this race this week. It seems that she will. A generational change candidate is the way she would be presented. And then you have Frank Baylis, you have potentially Jaime Batiste, you have Chandra Arya, and we're waiting to hear what Jonathan Wilkinson is going to do. Where do you stand on those candidates? Have you got a preference from what we've seen so far to speak to the values and the issues that you say you want the party to focus on?
Well, I want to hear them on their plan for the future of this Liberal Party, but also of the country. And like I said, there are things that are worth fighting for today. I think that Canada is at risk today, yes, because of the tariffs that Donald Trump wants to bring on our economy, but also because of the information system that we have in Canada. That's at risk under Pierre Poilievre, but also with the growing influence of a guy, of a billionaire geek like Elon Musk, who's trying to influence democratic countries across the world, including in Canada, and who just chose to endorse Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre was kissing up to Elon Musk, asking him for advice on how to run the country, and saying that Pierre Poilievre wants to defund CBC Radio-Canada. He wants to cut all the programs that are helping the media sector survive this financial crisis and the dominance of social media owned by Zuckerberg, Musk, and others. And Pierre Poilievre is ready to destroy everything that is making Canada, Canada, and sell Canada and sell us to a guy like Elon Musk.
Yeah, well, look, I know they enjoyed it when Elon Musk was criticizing your government. I'm not sure how much they enjoy it now that he's talking about absorbing Canada as the 51st state. And it seems pretty clear that he's not going to side with the Canadian government, whoever is leading it, over Donald Trump, certainly not in this current environment. But look,
it would help at the same time if he wasn't kissing up to Elon Musk publicly and asking him for help to run the country, to come implement his businesses here, and asking for advice on how to be strong economically. And that's after also not even acknowledging that Canada has attracted the foreign investments last year, and we're the third country to have the most foreign investments in the last year. So Pierre Poilievre is discrediting Canada, and he's kissing up to Elon Musk and asking him to tell him how to run the country. That's not only weird, but it's dangerous.
Okay, you talk about the importance of CBC Radio Canada and look at it as a career employee of the CBC and Radio Canada. I do believe this is an important institution, but one that needs some work, that needs some updating and refreshing to be relevant and responsive to a modern Canadian news cycle. You were in here talking about this with me as you talked about getting a new president and getting a new mandate. The president's there, the mandate is not. My understanding is it came out of your department, went into the Prime Minister's office, and now Parliament is prorogued and it may not see the light of day before the next election. So, I mean, there's a lack of urgency there on getting this done. I mean, where does this mandate need to go? Where do things stand? And what do you want the CBC to be should it survive the next election?
You know, there's still a government in place, and there is going to be a parliamentary session that's going to start on March 24th. And knowing the danger that's in front of us, I'm expecting the NDP and the Bloc to support the reform that I want to put forward to preserve the future of the CBC Radio-Canada. So there's still time for us to do the important work that we need to do to protect Canada from foreign business owners like Elon Musk, who's not only the owner of Twitter, but he's also part of the Trump's administration. And we need to do everything in our power to defend and protect Canada as it is. And CBC Radio-Canada has been there for almost 100 years old. They've been there through conservative and liberal governments, and they've been doing their job of informing the Canadian population, bringing facts forward so that we can make up our own minds. This is what Pierre Poilievre is ready to destroy and give the keys to a guy like Elon Musk.
Right, but Parliament is going to return on the 24th unless whoever wins this leadership race goes to the Governor General prior to that and asks for a dissolution and calls an election. It's going to open on the 24th, it may close on the 26th, which is on or about when the first confidence vote is going to happen, either in a speech, reply to the speech from the throne, or the interim supply, the budget estimates. It doesn't seem like you may get to table the CBC mandate legislation, I don't know if you're going to get it through Parliament, because everybody is saying they're going to vote down your government at the first opportunity, no matter what the resolution is. So it's too late, isn't it, at this point, Minister?
No, it's not too late. The NDP and the Bloc can still put forward the country first before their own electoral ambitions. There is going to be an election, but to protect Canada, with what's happening with the Trump administration, with the situation that we're in with Elon Musk, and TikTok that may fall also to Elon Musk in the next few weeks, the NDP and the Bloc still have the opportunity to help Canadians in what's coming. And that's putting country first. That's what a lot of my colleagues are doing right now, putting country before their own ambition. And this is what I'm expecting from the Bloc and the NDP. I mean, it's obvious the danger that we're facing, right. And we're elected to represent people first, and we have a job to do, and we still have weeks and the capacity to do it.
Right. Like, I can understand the value proposition to the New Democrats because they support public broadcasting and in both official languages and in the Indigenous languages. But the Bloc Québécois, Radio-Canada, is on nobody's chopping block. So what is the pitch to the Bloc Québécois to cooperate with you to save the English arm of the CBC, even though Mr. Blanchet comes on the show, as do his MPs, you know, given that they want an election because they want to take your government out?
No, well, the proposition that Poilievre is putting forward by saying he's going to defund CBC but keep Radio-Canada is fake. It's impossible. And everybody keeps on saying that. So the Bloc knows very well that if the CBC is defunded, CBC Radio-Canada loses a lot of their private revenues as well. It's going to bring the entire corporation down. Radio-Canada is not going to make it if a CBC is defunded. Right. And by the way, all of the G7 countries have a strong public broadcaster. Why does Pierre Poilievre want to deprive Canada from being a relevant G7 country and having our own sources of information in Canada, in all the regions of Canada? So the Bloc Québécois, they should know this. And if they put Quebec first and the French language first, they're going to do what is needed to protect what is dear to us.
So Minister, one last question, because I've gone over time, but this is what you want to do when Parliament comes back. Almost certainly we're going to go to an election very quickly after that. You going to be a candidate in the next election 100%? I know you're not running for leader, but are you running again to be a member of Parliament in the next election whenever it comes?
Yes, I'm ready to run in the next election. My bank account for the campaign is full, so of course I'm on the starting lines, but at the same time I'm expecting strong commitments from whomever wants to lead the party and wants to lead the country. I ran in 2021 because I believed in the work that this government was doing. I'm a valued-based person. I was a union leader before. And therefore, if the next leader doesn't promote some of the important ideas like CBC Radio-Canada, the environment, fighting climate change and stuff like that, I'm going to think about my future because I'm right. doing this for values and principles and for good policies.
Right. I can't imagine any of the frontrunners abandoning bilingualism, the environment, and public broadcasting. But, you know, 2025 has been a strange year so far. So who knows, Minister? There's Pascal St-Onge here, Minister. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.